My sister lied that I dropped out of medical school. My parents cut me off for 5 years. They missed my residency graduation and my wedding. Then my sister landed in my ER. Mom froze the moment she saw her attending physician. Hello everybody, my name is Dr. Claire Bennett. I'm 33 years old, and the first time my parents saw me in 5 years. I was standing at the foot of my sister's hospital bed, wearing a white coat. They had spent half a decade believing I'd dropped out of medical school, believing I'd thrown my future away, believing I had lied to them. None of it was true. The part that hurt the most wasn't the lie. It was that they never asked me if it was true. Not once. One phone call could have changed everything. Instead, they chose silence. If you'd asked anyone who knew us growing up, they would have said my younger sister, Rachel, and I were inseparable. We shared a bedroom until high school, borrowed each other's clothes, stayed awake whispering long after we were supposed to be asleep. She was only 18 months younger than me, and for most of our childhood, she was my best friend. Our parents adored us both. Dad coached our softball team. Mom never missed a school play or parent-teacher conference. We weren't wealthy. Dad worked as an electrician. Mom was a public school librarian. But they somehow managed to make every birthday feel magical. I honestly believed nothing could ever come between us. That started changing during my senior year of college. I'd always dreamed of becoming a doctor, not because of the title, because when I was 14, my grandfather suffered a heart attack. The emergency physician who treated him remained calm, while everyone else panicked. Watching her save his life changed mine forever. From that day on, I knew exactly what I wanted. Getting into medical school wasn't easy. Years of studying, volunteer work, research projects, countless interviews. The day I received my acceptance letter from the University of Michigan Medical School, my parents cried almost as hard as I did. Dad hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. You did it. We're so proud of you. Rachel smiled too. At least, she tried. But over the next several months, something between us quietly changed. Whenever relatives asked about my plans, they wanted to hear about medical school. Rachel had just graduated with a marketing degree and started her first job. People congratulated her too, but I could tell she hated how often conversations returned to me. One evening she joked, "I guess I'll never save enough lives to compete with a doctor." I laughed. "It's not a competition." She smiled. I know, but something in her voice felt different. Medical school was everything people warned me it would be. Long days, longer nights, coffee became an essential food group. Sometimes I'd study until 2 in the morning, sleep for 3 hours, and start again. Still, I loved every minute. Even the hardest days reminded me I was exactly where I belonged. During my second year, I became so busy that I wasn't always able to answer family calls immediately. I'd usually return them later that evening. Sometimes the next morning, Rachel seemed to notice. She started calling our parents more often, keeping them updated on my life. At least, that's what I thought. Near the end of my third year, I had to spend 6 weeks at a rural clinical rotation where phone service was unreliable. Before leaving, I texted everyone, "Signal may be terrible. I'll call whenever I can." Dad replied with a thumbs up. Mom sent a heart emoji. Rachel didn't answer. When I returned, everything had changed. The first clue came when Dad ignored my phone call. Then Mom. Neither answered. I assumed they were busy. The next day, I tried again. Straight to voicemail. A week later, I drove home for the weekend. Dad opened the front door. The look on his face stopped me cold. Disappointment, anger, almost embarrassment. "What are you doing here?" "I came to visit." "You've got some nerve." I stared at him. "What?" Mom appeared behind him. Tears filled her eyes. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Tell you what?" Dad folded his arms. "That you dropped out." I laughed in complete confusion. "What?" "Rachel told us everything." "What exactly did she tell you?" His voice hardened. "That you quit medical school months ago. That you've been pretending to attend classes. That you've been lying every time you called." For several seconds, I honestly couldn't process the words. "Dad, I've never left medical school." Mom shook her head. "Please don't lie to us. I have my student ID. I have my grades. I can show you." Dad interrupted. "Rachel saw you." "Saw me where?" "Working at a coffee shop instead of going to class." I blinked, then remembered. During one of my breaks, I'd picked up weekend shifts at a campus cafe for extra spending money. 2 Saturdays. That was all. I tried explaining. I had a part-time job. Dad laughed bitterly. "Medical students don't have time for coffee shops." "Some do." Rachel wouldn't make something like this up. I looked toward my sister. She was standing halfway down the hallway, watching, silent. "Rachel, tell them." She lowered her eyes. "I only told them what I saw." "No, you told them what you assumed." Dad pointed toward the driveway. I think you should leave. My chest tightened. You don't even want to see proof? I've heard enough. I stood there for another few seconds, waiting for someone, anyone, to ask a single question. Nobody did. I walked back to my car, cried the entire drive to campus. After that day, no birthday calls, no holiday invitations, no messages, nothing. I threw myself into medical school because it was the only thing I could control. I graduated, completed my residency in emergency medicine. My parents weren't there. When I got married to my husband, Daniel, 18 months later, their seats remained empty. The invitation had never been answered. Eventually, the silence became normal. Painful, but normal. 5 years passed. Then one rainy Thursday evening, I was finishing paperwork at the hospital after a busy shift when one of the charge nurses hurried over. Claire, we've got another ambulance coming. What have we got? 31-year-old female, severe abdominal pain, possible appendicitis. I nodded. Room 12? Already prepped. Minutes later, the ambulance arrived. The emergency department moved with its usual controlled urgency. The patient was transferred onto the hospital bed. I picked up the chart, then froze. Patient Rachel Bennett. My heart skipped. Before I could think, the nurse looked at me. Doctor, I took a slow breath. I'm okay. I pushed open the curtain and stepped into room 12. My sister looked frightened. Beside her bed, holding her hand, were my mother and father. 5 years had passed. They looked up as I entered, wearing my white coat. At first, they didn't recognize me. Then my father looked at my name badge. His eyes widened. Mom grabbed his arm so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Neither of them said a single word. Sometimes, the truth doesn't arrive through an argument. Sometimes, it quietly walks into the room, wearing a white coat. As my parents stared at the name embroidered above my pocket, the color slowly drained from their faces. They had just realized the lie they'd believed for 5 long years. For several long seconds, none of us spoke. My mother stared at the embroidered letters on my white coat. Dr. Claire Bennett. Dad blinked twice, as though his eyes had betrayed him. Rachel looked from me to them, then quietly whispered, Claire. I took a slow breath. Years of medical training immediately took over. I wasn't there as a daughter. I was there as her attending physician. I pulled the curtain closed, then smiled gently. Rachel, I'm going to take care of you. She nodded through tears. I began the examination, exactly as I would with any patient. When did the pain start? This afternoon. Any fever? A little. Nausea? Yes. I carefully examined her abdomen. She winced when I pressed the lower right side. I looked at the nurse. Let's get blood work and a CT scan. The nurse nodded. I'll order it now. Throughout the examination, my parents never stopped staring at me. When I finished, I turned toward them. I'll come back as soon as we have the imaging results. Dad finally found his voice. Claire, I answered politely. Right now, I'm your daughter's doctor. We'll talk later. Then I quietly walked out. An hour later, the CT confirmed exactly what I'd suspected. Acute appendicitis. Fortunately, it hadn't ruptured. I returned to Rachel's room. The good news is we caught it in time. We'll have surgery tonight. Rachel let out a shaky breath. Am I going to be okay? I smiled. Yes. The surgical team is excellent. You'll likely go home tomorrow. She reached for my hand. Thank you. I gently squeezed hers. That's my job. Once the surgical team arrived, another physician officially assumed her care. Only then was I finally able to become a daughter again. I found my parents sitting alone in the family waiting room. Dad stood the moment he saw me. His voice barely worked. You really became a doctor. I looked at him quietly. I never stopped. Mom covered her face. Oh my God. Dad shook his head. We believed. I know. We should have called. Yes. We should have asked. Yes. Mom looked at me through tears. Why didn't you come back? I couldn't believe the question. I did. Both of them looked confused. I came to the house. I called. I tried to explain. Dad closed the door. His shoulders dropped. I remember. I thought I was protecting the family. I looked at him sadly. From what? He had no answer. Just silence. After several minutes, Rachel was wheeled past us toward surgery. She looked frightened. I smiled reassuringly. You're going to do great. She nodded. As the doors closed behind her, Dad suddenly sat down. I need to tell you something. I waited. The week after you left, I called your medical school. My heart skipped. What? They wouldn't tell me anything. They legally couldn't. I convinced myself that proved Rachel was right. I closed my eyes. You wanted to believe her. He slowly nodded. Yes, I did. Mom looked devastated. I kept asking if we should try harder. But every time, Rachel cried and insisted you were lying. My stomach tightened. Why? Mom whispered. We didn't know. 3 hours later, Rachel's surgery was over. It went perfectly. The surgeon smiled. She'll make a full recovery. Everyone exhaled at once. The next morning, after Rachel was awake and feeling better, she quietly asked if she could speak to me alone. I pulled a chair beside her bed. For several moments, she simply cried. I've rehearsed this conversation for years. I stayed silent. I lied. I know. I didn't actually see you quit. No. I saw you working at the coffee shop. She nodded. I was angry. Why? Because every conversation was about you. You were becoming a doctor. I felt invisible. She looked down. I told Mom you said medical school was too hard. Then, soon I couldn't stop. The lie got bigger every week. I asked the question I'd carried for 5 years. Why didn't you tell them the truth? She closed her eyes. Because after they cut you off, I was terrified. If I admitted I'd lied, I thought I'd lose them too. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, I'm so sorry. I believed her. Not because the pain disappeared, because guilt had clearly lived with her for years. That afternoon, my parents came into the room together. Dad looked older than I'd ever seen him. He held a folder. I brought something. Inside were photographs, my residency graduation announcement, my wedding invitation, Christmas cards I'd mailed every year, all unopened. He swallowed hard. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. So couldn't admit I might have been wrong. Mom quietly cried. We missed everything. Yes, you did. Dad nodded slowly. I don't expect forgiveness. I know, but I wanted you to hear me say this. He looked directly into my eyes. I failed you, not because I believed a lie, because I never trusted my own daughter enough to ask for the truth. For the first time in 5 years, I hugged him, not because everything was fixed, because honesty had finally replaced pride. Epilogue. Soft piano becomes lighter, carrying healing instead of regret. It's been almost 4 years since Rachel's emergency surgery. She recovered completely. These days, she's one of my closest friends again. Not because we forgot what happened, because she spent years rebuilding the trust she broke. She never asked me to move on. She simply showed me through her actions that she had changed. My parents never missed another milestone. When Daniel and I welcomed our first child, they were waiting in the hospital lobby with flowers. Dad cried the first time he held his granddaughter. He quietly whispered, I almost lost all of this. He wasn't talking about the baby. He was talking about us. My thoughts. Looking back, the greatest tragedy wasn't that my sister lied. People sometimes make terrible decisions out of jealousy, fear, or insecurity. The real tragedy was that my parents believed a story about me without ever asking me if it was true. Trust isn't just believing the people you love. It's caring enough to hear their side before making a judgment. 5 years of silence began with one unanswered question. 5 years of healing began with one honest conversation. The day I walked into Rachel's hospital room, I wasn't wearing a white coat to prove anyone wrong. I was simply doing the job I'd never stopped working toward. In the end, the truth didn't need to raise its voice. It simply walked into the room wearing my name.